The movie opens inside a gritty underground fight club, where two brawlers, Harry and Ron, are locked in a brutal match. Harry's speed and precision soon overpower Ron, and he wins decisively. As the crowd roars, a man named Frankie arrives to watch. But before Harry can bask in his victory, another fighter, Elwood, steps into the ring. Confident at first, Harry boasts that he'll take Elwood down, until Elwood pulls back his hoodie, revealing his face. The sight alone rattles Harry, who suddenly declares he doesn't want to die and flees the ring. Elwood collects a sizable payout for simply showing up. On his way to his car, Frankie approaches him. She explains she originally came looking for Harry but, after witnessing the scene, believes Elwood is the better choice. Frankie tells him she owns a Florida bar called the Roadhouse, which has been plagued by violent troublemakers, and she needs someone tough to handle security. Elwood declines, saying he doesn't have the time. Before leaving, Frankie slips him her number. Later that night, Elwood, clearly battling inner demons, drives toward a railroad crossing with the apparent intent to end his life. At the last moment, he changes his mind, but his car stalls on the tracks. A train slams into it, completely destroying the vehicle. Remarkably, Elwood survives. When he opens his eyes, Frankie's number is lying right in front of him. The next day, Elwood boards a bus to Florida. Upon arrival, he steps into a small bookstore across from the station. The owner's daughter, Kate, hands him a book about local landmarks and suggests he read it. He briefly meets her father before heading out, explaining that he's there to work at a place called the Roadhouse. At the bar, Elwood meets Laura, the bartender, and a man named James, who reveals he's a longtime fan. Elwood is actually a former heavyweight boxing world champion. That night, Frankie watches from a distance as tensions in the club rise. A biker gang led by Dan storms in, harassing patrons and making unwanted advances toward a young woman. James steps in, but Dan threatens him. Elwood intervenes, calmly suggesting they take it outside. Dan refuses, so Elwood heads toward the gang's parked bikes, forcing them to follow. He warns them to leave before things get ugly, but Dan arrogantly promises to take him down first. The fight is quick and one-sided. Elwood dismantles the entire gang with ease. Despite his lethal skills, he remains compassionate, personally escorting the injured men to the hospital and claiming responsibility for the fight. After dealing with the biker gang, Elwood quietly slips out of the hospital. A nurse named Ellie stops him, remarking that he must feel like a hero for beating up gangsters, but his actions, she warns, can have consequences. When people like you put thugs in the hospital, good people end up waiting longer for care, she says. Elwood calmly responds that he isn't a gangster, he just took the job for the money. Ellie notices a small cut on his arm. When he admits he's a little injured, she treats the wound, and he thanks her before heading out. Outside, a few suspicious men watch him from a distance, but Elwood ignores them and returns to the Roadhouse. Frankie greets him with a payment for the night's work. Looking around, Elwood comments on how beautiful the place is. Frankie smiles, while Elwood's mind drifts back to a moment years ago, stepping into the ring for a high-stakes boxing match. Shaking off the memory, he sits down as Laura arrives with breakfast. She tells him Frankie has hired plenty of bouncers before, but all of them eventually quit after clashing with the local gangs. But with you here, she says, I think things will finally be okay. Elwood thanks her for the food. Later, he heads to the bookstore and finds Kate behind the counter. He asks if he can use her computer for some work, and she obliges. While Elwood focuses on the screen, trouble brews outside. Members of Dan's gang start harassing passers-by. Kate grabs a baseball bat and confronts them, but they only mock her. When Elwood steps outside, the gangsters immediately back off and leave. Kate admits she despises gangsters. Her father had to take another job because the bookstore couldn't sustain them financially. Meanwhile, Dan's crew returns to their leader, Ben. They explain that Dan is still in the hospital and describe the strange bouncer who politely warned them before single-handedly taking them down. Ben scoffs, telling them they're useless and declaring he'll handle the bouncer himself. That evening at the Roadhouse, tensions flare once again. Two patrons start arguing, and Elwood discreetly tips off James to handle it. James steps in, breaks up the fight, and, when things escalate, throws a few punches, with Elwood assisting when needed. Together, they toss out the troublemakers. The display earns Elwood even more admiration from the regulars. Over time, he begins training the other staff to work as a team, preventing brawls before they get out of hand. That night, Elwood dreams of a past fight, taunting his opponent in the ring before striking him across the face. The memory lingers, heavy and unresolved. Elwood wakes from his troubling dream, visibly unsettled. The next morning, he stops by a small restaurant for breakfast and spots Ellie there. She joins him, and Elwood comments that the food is as good as he'd heard, though he can't help but notice how tense and short-tempered the locals seem. Ellie shrugs, saying this town has always been different, especially after dark. That night, while heading home from the Roadhouse, Elwood senses danger. A truck speeds up behind him. It's Dan. Elwood dives out of the way just in time, but Dan swings the truck around for another attempt. The chase pushes them toward the water, and Dan loses control, crashing into it. He survives, climbing out drenched, but by the time Elwood makes it back to his boat, Dan is already there, aiming a gun. Dan admits he planned to make Elwood's death look like a road accident, but since that failed, he'll have to shoot him. Before he can fire, Elwood lunges, knocking the gun aside and throwing Dan overboard. Dan shouts that he won't let Elwood go, but in that moment, a massive crocodile bursts from the water and clamps its jaws around him. Despite their feud, Elwood tries to pull Dan free, but the animal drags him under and disappears into the dark water. By the next day, news of the attack has rattled the entire town. Locals remind each other that the nearby waters have always been dangerous because of the crocodiles. Elwood, lost in thought, leaves the crowd. He's soon approached by a gangster delivering a message. Ben wants to see him. Elwood responds by breaking the man's fingers, telling him if Ben wants a meeting, he can come in person. Back at the Roadhouse, Frankie reacts casually to the news of Dan's death, calling it a relief since he had been causing trouble for years. Elwood isn't so sure, wondering what had drawn Dan into this business in the first place. Elsewhere, Ben's men report Elwood's insult to their boss. The news infuriates Ben, but his anger turns to fear when his phone rings. It's his father, Gerald. Ben's reaction is instant and panicked. He hurls the phone into the sea. Meanwhile, in another location, a fearsome figure named Knox answers a call from Gerald. Gerald orders him to clear out the Roadhouse. Later, Ellie visits Elwood's boat, asking if he'll take her out on the water. He agrees, and they sail to a secluded island. They sit together on the shore, the mood calm but tense. Ellie remarks that Dan's body will never be found and that the area has always been dangerous, something Elwood should already know. Back in town, Ben arrives at his waterfront home, where Knox is waiting. The two men finally meet. Knox greets Ben with a brutal punch to the face, injuring him. He coldly explains that Gerald, Ben's father, sent him to take care of the bouncer problem. Ben is baffled, pointing out that his father is in prison. Knox smirks, telling him Gerald's influence stretches far beyond the prison walls, with loyal spies everywhere. Desperate, Ben pleads for a chance to remove Elwood himself. Knox agrees, but warns that if Elwood doesn't leave, he'll make him disappear permanently. Later, Ellie drops Elwood off near his boat, but before he can board, police officers arrive and arrest him. They take him to the sheriff, who wastes no time assaulting Elwood, shoving a gun in his face, and ordering him to leave town or be killed. At that moment, Ellie storms in, slaps the sheriff across the face, and drags Elwood away. On the way out, she reveals the truth. The sheriff is her father, a good man once, but now completely under the control of Gerald and his son, Ben. Meanwhile, across town, two of Ben's men approach a shop near Kate's bookstore with plans to set it ablaze. Kate confronts them, but the scene cuts away before we see the outcome. That night, Elwood returns to the Roadhouse and finds Ben waiting. Ben tells him he's certain Elwood won't leave, no matter how much he's paid. Then, he reveals what he's learned. Elwood once fought in MMA, and his final match was against his best friend. Elwood won, but in a burst of uncontrollable rage, he also killed him. Ben demands to know why. Elwood stays silent, haunted by the truth, that his inability to control his anger cost his friend's life. Enraged, Ben storms outside and tells Knox to finish the job. Knox and his crew smash their way into the Roadhouse, attacking patrons and destroying everything in sight. The chaos spreads quickly, and even the regular bar fights pale in comparison to the havoc Knox's gang unleashes. Elwood tries to restrain himself, but when Knox approaches, he steps forward. Knox, recognizing him instantly, declares that he came specifically for Elwood. Their fight is fierce, both men fast, skilled, and evenly matched. They trade heavy blows until their brawl spills outside. Bloodied and battered, Elwood eventually pulls back and leaves, unable to continue. Inside, the Roadhouse is in ruins, and Frankie is left devastated by the destruction. Outside, Elwood crosses paths with Frankie. She admits she's been hiding things from him, most importantly, that she doesn't want to sell the Roadhouse. Elwood coldly replies that he doesn't care who dies and admits he's scared. Without waiting for a response, he walks away. Arriving at the bus station, Elwood notices Kate's shop has been completely burned down. He rushes inside, calling out for her. A bystander tells Elwood that Kate and her father have been taken to the hospital. Without hesitation, Elwood heads to Ben's house. Outside, a gangster taunts him about liking Kate. Ben, visibly tense, admits he's been thinking about leaving because he's always feared his own temper. Then, without warning, he lashes out, killing the gangster on the spot. Elwood explains that he understands that fear all too well, because when his anger takes over, he can't stop himself. He loads the body into the back of a truck. A young man nearby blurts out that Ben's cash shipment for the mafia is due soon and insists he was just hanging out. Elwood lets him go. But the moment brings back the darkest memory he has, beating his best friend senseless in the ring, unable to stop until it was too late. The guilt still burns. The next day, Elwood intercepts an officer delivering the mafia's payment. He kills the man, takes the bag, and finds it packed with cash. Returning to his boat, he begins setting explosives, clearly preparing for something bigger. That's when Jim arrives, panicked. He tells Elwood that Ben has kidnapped his daughter, Ellie, and is demanding the money's return. Elwood agrees to a trade and arranges to meet them on the water. Hours later, Elwood pulls his boat alongside Ben's. Jim peers across. "I don't see the money," he says. "I don't see Ellie," Elwood replies. Ben claims Ellie is being held below deck, unaware that Knox is speeding toward them from the distance. Elwood presses a detonator, blowing up his own boat. The blast sends a shockwave through the water, and Ben's vessel begins to flood. Elwood dives below and finds Ellie, freeing her. They swim upward, but before they can reach safety, Ben grabs her and drags her onto another boat. Meanwhile, Knox closes in on Elwood. Acting fast, Elwood leaps onto Knox's vessel. The two men battle fiercely across the deck until Elwood throws Knox overboard. Knox clings to a rope, hauling himself back up just as Ben steers his boat directly toward them in a collision course. Elwood jumps away at the last second, sending Knox crashing into the water again. Ben pushes ahead, speeding toward the Roadhouse. Elwood and Ellie jump clear moments before the boat smashes into the building. Knox, still relentless, hauls himself onto a nearby bridge and hijacks a car. Back at the Roadhouse, Ben tries to ambush Elwood, but Elwood counters, landing heavy blows. That's when Knox appears again, this time coming at him from behind. Elwood and Knox collide in a brutal final showdown, each strike heavier than the last, both men taking and dealing serious damage. Elwood tries to lock Knox in for a decisive blow, but Knox counters, driving a jagged piece of wood into him. Ben suddenly charges forward, aiming to finish Elwood himself, but Knox turns on him, slamming the wood into Ben's side. Ben crumples. Knox pivots back to Elwood, ready for the killing strike. In a last surge of strength, Elwood rises, wrests the wood from Knox, and drives him back with a series of crushing blows. Knox staggers, bloodied and broken, before finally collapsing unconscious. Ellie and Jim rush in moments later. Jim tells Elwood, "Go. I'll handle the rest." Without another word, Elwood leaves the scene. Hours later, Frankie and the remaining staff gather at the battered Roadhouse. Determined, they begin rebuilding together, hammering and hauling debris under the glow of the setting sun. Meanwhile, Elwood waits at a quiet bus stop. Kate arrives, surprised to see him. "You are leaving?" she asks. Elwood nods with a faint smile, happy to see she's safe. In the distance, Kate's father spots a heavy bag of cash in her shop. Realizing what it means, he races toward the stop, but by the time he arrives, Elwood has already boarded the bus. The doors close, and it pulls away.